The 2024 fantasy football season has come and gone. Tonight, we flip the script with our way too early 2025 fantasy football sleepers. All this and more. It's the IBT podcast coming right at you.
I've been going dummy, out of bounds, putting on a clinic. Stick around, carrots in my hardware. KC, caught him in the crosshair. Look at me, been the guy calling Mr. MVP. Keep your ass on the bench by my MPC. Earn my stripes like I fits this league. Your dog's on the turf, my dog's in the street. You can find me somewhere in between. Never a dull moment like a movie scene. About to do the ops like I did this beat. Let them keep talking RG3. Coming to you live. This is the In Between Fantasy Football Podcast.
All right. It is Tuesday, December 30th, 2024. This is the In Between Fantasy Football Podcast, your place for both a refreshing and feel-good take on fantasy football and NFL gambling. This is also our final episode of 2024. It's been a sensational year for us both at IBT and personally, maybe the best year yet. I hope you can say the same. Thank you so much, everyone around the internet who supports this program and the channel as a whole. I'm your host, Seth Wilcock, and vibes are certainly high as another fantasy football season has come to its end. And I'm joined by the trivia champion of our office Christmas party from Saturday night, Boston's boy, big swinging Steve Lawson. Steve, how did the fantasy football season end for you? And was 2024 as a whole everything you thought it'd be?
Yeah, the fantasy football season looks like it's ending with a dub. So that's big. In my first year in a league, first year in a dynasty league, I stepped in, took over. We got that dub. As far as 2024 goes, it was a fantastic year. I met the man I love, and I want to give all sorts of, my love and gratitude to my boyfriend. So Andy, thank you very much. And very grateful to have been part of IBT now for a little over a year.
Oh yeah.
So it's been a solid year for me overall.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, man. And let's keep those positive vibes heading into 2025. We also got our guy Eric Romoff joining us. He's a big business son of a bitch, a light ranching motherfucker. Cool, like the other side of the pillow. Eric, happy New Year. How did your fantasy football championships wrap up? Any parting thoughts for 2024?
I am in the midst of blowing a 35-point lead to the Jared Goff team. So you guys get to watch me go on tilt right now, live on the air. I got like 4 points I got to sweat out. So this will be a fun show. 2024 advice: lead by more than 35 points heading into Monday Night Football. Anytime that you can would certainly be my suggestion.
For real.
I feel you there, man. And hopefully we can end 2024 on a good night tonight. Hopefully by the end of the program, we'll know if you're a winner or a loser. 2024, honestly insane. I feel like first and foremost, as kind of Steve alluded to, got engaged to my long-term girlfriend, Katie, now fiance. IBT, we also, I feel like as a whole, as a company, kind of really cranked things up a notch. Very much up to something season right now. Some big stuff in the works. We're excited to share with you guys in 2025. A lot of new opportunities presenting themselves. But I think more than anything, like just grew a shit ton as an individual this past year. And like, that's really what it's all about, right? Like, I love winning fantasy football championships. Love that I'm becoming a better gambler in the NFL, college football, NASCAR space. But more than anything, like we want to continue to grow and become better people. That's all, what IBT is all about here. So anyways, we've got a stacked program for you tonight. Early 2025 sleepers are all in the scope team. Our best waiver wire calls a week early. Weekly advice. We'll wrap up with our fantasy football New Year's resolutions. And then behind the scenes, we also have our producer. He's a Yinzer. He's also a Ginger. I believe he's a former IUP Crimson Hawk. Mr. Kyle Scott, Happy New Year, Jim. Appreciate you putting together quite the trivia Saturday festivities, my friend.
Yeah, of course, anytime. Making trivia is my true passion. My one true passion in life is making trivia questions that no one gets right. So anytime you want me to do that, I'll do it.
There are a couple hard ones in that mascot category. How about it, Steve? That was a tough one.
Yeah, I thought it would be so much easier than it was, but I also want to thank Kyle. He made me a category. Like, there was a whole category named after me. So
yes.
that was fun.
Yeah, that was a great time. Very, very appreciative of everyone coming out to hang out with us. Eric did not because he's the Grinch and also has 2 kids that he's chasing around the house every day. But shout out to the IBT family. Thanks again for all the support in 2024. We're going to keep it moving into 2025. So please like this video if you enjoy this type of content. Also, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Looks like we got Tyler Bradley, one of the newest members of IBT, who's hanging out with us in the chat tonight. You got to get Tyler on for an episode very shortly in 2025. But Tyler, thanks for making time for us, brother. Good to see you. Hope you had a great Christmas and getting ready for a great New Year's Eve tomorrow, where the Penn State Nittany Lions, favored by 11. Let's go. Let's lay the house on it. What do you think?
Who cares?
Who cares? Have some. This is my Super Bowl, brother. This is my Super Bowl.
That's sad because it's not even the championship.
Hey, we will get there. We are going to talk about not 2025 rookies today, but a lot of 2024 rookies and some short thing sleepers of the week while we're previewing some 2025 sleepers. Let's turn it up a notch.
It's the short thing. Sleepers of the week.
All right, sure thing. Sleepers of the week. Way too early 2025 sleepers. These are players we're expecting to be drafted outside the top 100 of ADP. And we're going to go right through the list at position by position, starting with Eric. You like Michael Penix Jr. for the Atlanta Falcons coming up this next year, Eric. Tell me about what you're liking about Penix 2 games into his starting career.
Yeah, first and foremost, I like the presumed price tag. I think he's going to be one of these guys that should be very cheap heading into next season's draft. And more than anything, a guy who is surrounded by talent, right? We talk about guys like Baker Mayfield kind of coming out of nowhere, Geno Smith a few years ago, Sam Darnold this year, right? Guys that are in good situations, in good offensive systems, and that have a lot of support around them. So, a 2-game sample you can't really draw a ton from. It seems like he's already figured out that he needs to go to Drake London in high leverage situations and let him use that big body. That is a good sign, right? It seems like he's not shy about uncorking it. He's got a little bit of wheels on him that we haven't seen him fully utilize yet. So I think there's a lot of upside to his game, and I don't think that his draft capital or his price tag is going to reflect that when it comes around to draft season next year.
That 4th down throw to Kyle Pitts was insane on Sunday Night Football. I love Michael Penix. I that was like one of the most fun Sunday Night Football games I can remember in a while, just watching 2 young guns sling it out, comes down to the very end. So shout out MPJ. I also think he could be a sneaky guy. I'm really curious to see what he can do with his legs because, as you guys know, suffered a couple injuries back in Indiana, 2 season-ending knee surgeries. So I'm wondering if he can he give us 250, 300 rushing yards? Then I think he could really push himself into that QB1 category. Someone who I think is already in that borderline QB1 category, one of my favorite sleepers for 2025, it's Drake freaking Maye, quarterback for the New England Patriots. Since taking over the starting job in week 6, Drake Maye, QB12 overall, QB14 in points per game. And that, keep in mind, that's coming in 1 game in week 8 where he only played 30% of the snaps before leaving with a concussion. So he's already basically a quarterback 1, right? On a 17-game pace for 3,500 passing yards, 23 passing touchdowns, 651 rushing yards. That's what's important here. Those are the type of numbers that Daniel Jones was putting up on the ground during his peak 2020. I believe, what was that? 2021, 2022? 2022 season. 22, well, yeah. Time moves fast these days, folks. But this is thrown to Hunter Henry, Kayshon Boutte, Pop Douglas, behind a bottom 5 offensive line as a rookie. Drake Maye himself is going to get better. Let's upgrade the offensive line, give him some more weapons, maybe a better head coach as well. And I think there's top 5 upside with Drake Maye as early as next year. And I think he'll still be drafted outside the top 100 overall. Both my championship teams had Drake Maye on it, so I'm willing to go right back to the well here.
I like both those options.
Absolutely love it, right? If nothing else, a guy that's shown that he can get it done a few different ways, a team that has an absolute bag to go out and help put some supporting cast around him. And look, Drake Maye, he hasn't uncorked it a ton, but kids got a hose, right? So if it's I don't know, T Higgins streaking down the field for him this time next year, like all of a sudden he can cap that upside. Steve, what I'm curious to hear about from you as our New England correspondent, Coach Mayo. What are we thinking about up there? It sounds like there's a little bit more leash because he was the heir apparent for so long.
I think you just got to start over. Right. I think Gerard Mayo as a man is a good person. I'm not going to sit here and like bash the guy. I just don't think this is the right fit. And I think especially when you have a young quarterback, you need an offensive mind. I'd love for the Patriots to go get Ben Johnson. I think this is an appealing
Hold the
fit for
fucking
him.
phone. Holy
Like
cow.
that would be really appealing, I think, for Ben Johnson, where they have a high draft pick, they have a upside quarterback, they have money to spend. You're telling me they don't get Ted McMillan and T Higgins this offseason and they can't go like entice someone to come show up? Like that's what I'd do if I was the New England Patriots. Like set this man up to succeed, set Drake May up to succeed, and you get an offensive minded guru like that. Joe Brady, another guy who could be a really good choice for New England.
Might not be great for fantasy for Drake May if Brady's up there, but he would at least probably use his wheels, which is great. So
it seems to be working out for Josh Allen. So
and if they had Tet and T Higgins running out there, I'll tell you one thing: Drake May is not going past 100 in any leagues I'm in because I would be all over it. But I really like these guys. I think they could be high upside players next year. Steve, if you had to pick one, like you're on the board, let's say you have no quarterbacks, you're right around that quarterback 15 range next year, 12th, 13th round, who you picking, Drake May or Michael Penix as of now?
Drake May because of the rushing upside. I think Penix just doesn't want to run right now. I just don't think it's really on his radar.
And I feel like more than anything, quarterbacks like these two will be very important in 2025 because, if you're not going after Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, like you're just better off waiting, right? If you drafted, I mean, I guess some people at Joe Burrow were pretty happy with Joe Burrow, but like if you drafted Kyler, not happy. If you drafted Patrick Mahomes, not happy. Jaden Daniels, you're happy, but he was still going in that 10th, 9th round later in some cases range, but like. You drafted Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence, you're not happy with a lot of those guys. So I think you're better off just waiting till later. Let's shift. Go ahead and shift to the running back position, though. And Steve, I want to talk about your first sleeper for 2025. It's a guy near and dear to your heart, someone who has been on your radar since your days and his days back at Florida State.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a homer pick, but it's a pick that I can back up with just watching him play. Trey Benson. Out in Arizona. Listen, James Conner, great story, great player, right? Like great might be a little bit of a stretch as far as the player, but he's good, right? Like he's done a good job, but the wheels have come off for James Conner here. We watched it happen. We're watching it it's just not going well anymore. He doesn't have that
out there. He's plotting a little bit.
It's kind of just running in cement shoes. It's not his fault. He's had a long, very physical career. He overcame a lot to get to where he's at. I respect the man entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But you have Trey Benson, who's a home run hitter at the running back position. He's big, he's fast, he's strong. This is the running back of the future. There's a reason they took him when they did. They were waiting. It seems like that's what teams are doing with running backs these days, is they're kind of taking their rookies and sitting them and just saying like, hey, we're not good right now. It's not really worth killing you over. Let's go run our veteran until they're dust, and then we'll let you take the reins from there and then run you into dust. And so I expect Trey Benson to be the lead next year in probably like a 65-35 split with Conner.
Even with didn't James Conner, Eric, just get a pretty big contract a couple weeks ago?
He did. We talked about it on the show. It's I don't want to say it's entirely smoke and mirrors, right? But there's some contract magic in that number, right? Like it accelerated a lot of his variable pay into guaranteed pay for this year's cap, where Arizona had the room, and they can get off the hook for that for a much more reasonable figure than what it appears to be on paper. It's kind of like it's almost like Josh Jacobs' contract, right? Like very front loaded. If Arizona's in a spot next year where they've got one of the higher paid backups in James Conner, I think they're perfectly fine from a cap situation.
It's interesting because like this was really just not the year to go out and draft rookie running backs in your redraft leagues. Like you probably spent, a 10th, 9th, maybe 11th round pick on Trey Benson, something similar for Blake Corum as well. I know I had a ton of Corum investments, so that didn't go well. So it's like, unless you drafted Bucky Irvin in one of the last 2 rounds, or you picked him up week 1. It was kind of tough sledding. So I don't mind the call on Benson. I still think it might be James Conner to start out next year, and it might have to be an injury that takes him off the field and gives it to Benson. But I like the call nonetheless, Steve, because very post-hype sleeper, right? You're going to get him later next year than you are this year for sure. Eric, I want to go to you because you're in on a potential next year, a 3rd year running back for the Tennessee Titans. Tell us about it.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do is to target the next guy up, right? Kind of like what Steve is doing with Trey Benson. For me, the name I want to talk about is Tyjae Spears, a guy that, look, every single time, whether it's for some reason Tony Pollard running in front of him or running behind one of the best to ever do it, King Henry, just looks completely explosive with the ball in his hand. He is a very, very capable weapon as a receiver, and dude is just making things out of thin air. Number 7 this year, 4.58 yards created per touch, right? So a guy that in limited opportunity can make some very big plays. Their skill sets are different, but their profile is kind of similar to that of Chase Brown from last year, right? Towards down the stretch run from the year prior, wasn't getting a whole lot of opportunity, but as he got it, was really putting some good tape out there, and eventually the cream will rise to the top, right? These offensive-minded coaches, these coaches in general, want to put their most explosive players out there. And, if nothing else, Tony Pollard hasn't exactly showed us that he has this job has a stranglehold on this job. Mm-hmm. So I think we're talking about a guy that won't get the draft capital that is going to cost you anything, and, could either by merit earn his role, or as we saw down the stretch run here, have some injuries that creates a pretty big role for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyjae Spears, a guy coming out of Tulane a few years ago with no ACLs, is someone that I've really enjoyed as a prospect. I think he's a much better pass catcher than he gets credit for. Really good inside the 20. He's found the end zone a few times to end this season. But despite that, I don't think he's going to have a lot of hype next year because Tony Pollard was arguably up until these last few weeks like a league winner, right? Like where you got Pollard, you were drafting Pollard pretty late around that RB 27, 30 range. So yeah, shout out to Tony Pollard for putting the team on his back early, and then Tyjae Spears kind of cleaning up here. I think he's an interesting play next year. I just want to see how much work does he get, right? Because it felt like at times they really made him the feature back. So do you think, Eric, we'll see a little bit more work for Spears next year just based on kind of what he's shown us at the end of this season?
I would think so, right? Tennessee is probably going to be looking for answers in a lot of different ways in the next season and probably seasons to come, right? So, as organizations head into these rebuilds, right? Like anytime that they can sort of check the box and say like, hey, we have a viable guy at this position, let's go solve another position, they tend to do that. And I think, even if it ends up being, a split backfield between Pollard and Spears to start the season, over the course of the year, I think we will see Spears separate. And once they feel comfortable that they've got a guy that they can rely on or not have to go fill a hole around, they're just going to move on to addressing other areas on this roster. So I do think that there's a pretty good range on his range of outcomes that will find him getting a lot of work next year.
Love it. Also love we got Toronto Dave hanging out with us in the chat tonight. What's up, TD? Good to see you, brother. Hope your 2024 fantasy football season wrapped up nicely. Hope you're having a great holiday stretch here as we're just a little over. No, yeah, about 25 hours away from New Year's Eve here. So excited for that. Let's go ahead. I'm going to shift gears into my favorite sleeper 2025 wide receiver. It's Jalen McMillan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, wide receiver 11 over the past 3 weeks before coming into week 17, where he is wide receiver 12 this week, pending Monday Night Football. And a legit target share earner down the stretch without Chris Godwin on this team. Target rates of 25%, 23.1%, 16.3%, and 15.6% these past 4 weeks. Caught 7 touchdowns in just 12 games this season. And the more I see McMillan, the more I really like this guy's style. He plays a bit bigger than he actually is. He's only 6'1", but plays a bit bigger, pretty smooth with his release, and a good catch radius. He's been making plays down the stretch for Baker and company. Chris Godwin is a free agent after this year. So I think he's someone that we're going to pay for McMillan, probably in that round 9, round 10 range. If Chris Godwin doesn't return, I don't think Godwin will return just because like 3rd round pick McMillan he's been really, really good. So I'm wheels up for McMillan here in 2025. Steve, any thoughts on McMillan, who was really a league winner for people down the stretch? And who is your favorite 2025 sleeper wide receiver as well?
Yeah. So I think McMillan will be a good pick because I do think Chris Godwin's going to go elsewhere. I think it's really unfortunate the way Chris Godwin's season ended, right? Especially coming
He was on a
where
heater.
he was on a heater. He's due for a contract. So that's obviously going to play a factor. But you look at a team like, I mean, again, New England or the Chargers, right? That desperately need like that help at wide receiver to like give them a little bit more. I just don't see Chris Godwin going back.
I don't either.
To Tampa. I wouldn't be surprised if he stays in
Steelers.
The
let's
Lurs
get him in Pittsburgh.
there,
and
bring
him
he
home.
He may stay in division and go to Carolina. So, like, I would not be shocked to see him as a Carolina Panther either. My guy for next year, he's popping off tonight and fucking up my whole idea of keeping him as a sleeper. It's Ricky Pearsall. He's legit. He's a good player. He's a talented player. Debo is kind of running out of steam. Brandon Ayuk never really looked the part this season that we thought he was. Signed the massive deal. I know he didn't really have an off season. So who knows with that, but we've seen that 2 wide receivers can do very well in this scheme. And outside of 1 week, Jauan Jennings is not the number 2 receiver in San Francisco. It's going to be Ricky Pearsall. This is the guy, even if he winds up being the slot guy, you want him, right? He's a burner. He's fast. He can make contested catches. He's good with the ball in his hands. He separates well. He's got good footwork. He's got a good rapport with Purdy. Like everything is ticking boxes of why you want Ricky Pearsall going into next year. He's got the draft capital to back it up too. So I'm pretty in on him. If I'm outside the top 100 picks and I land Pearsall, I'm pretty happy because he's probably going to be a starter.
You think Jauan Jennings is going to try to get a new contract here, Eric? He's on a 1.17 million deal going into next year. I think there might be a holdout coming or something because I'm actually like I like what Jauan Jennings has kind of done down the stretch here. To be honest with you, I think he has honestly been like really the wide receiver 1 for this team. Outside of George Kittle was maybe the pass catching option 1 here down the stretch. But Eric, your kind of thoughts on this 49ers wide receiver room and specifically Ricky Pearsall into next year? Because I love the talent. I have him everywhere in Dynasty, Steve. So I'm definitely in on Pearsall. It just feels a bit cloudy for me. And I was all the way in this past year on Pearsall. I had him everywhere, Eric.
Yeah, to your question with Jennings, probably will try to get a new contract, right? It's usually the case when these sort of pedestrian guys put up respectable years. They want to get paid for it. And San Francisco is pretty notorious about not negotiating with wide receivers who want new contracts. So maybe if he's around, it's on like a cheap kind of sweetheart deal or like a bridge deal that gets him to free agency in 2 more seasons or something like that. In terms of Ricky Pearsall, what I like most about him, and we talked about this as he was having his little kind of mid-season semi-breakout, is he profiles almost exactly like Brandon Ayuk. There is a lot of Brandon Ayuk to his game. I believe we'll have to see it at scale. I believe the 49ers can use him in very similar ways. And while Brandon Ayuk is relatively young, you start looking around this receiving room, and there are some guys getting a little long in the tooth, right? You can say the same thing about your last player, Jalen McMillan, right?
Yeah.
Even if Chris Godwin comes back, Mike Evans is not going to keep doing this forever and ever, right? So, prospecting and speculating in these wide receiver rooms or in these backfields where the incumbent is, right around, if not slightly past that age cliff. I mean, there's obviously risk in it, but the reward if it hits is tremendous. So I love the Pearsall call overall.
Yeah, it's going to be a very different looking San Francisco team next year. I'm kind of excited to see how they shape it out. Do they hang on to McCaffrey? Do they hang on to Debo? What's going to happen there? Looks like we got TD in the chat saying he won 1 ship.
DD.
Let's go, buddy. Well, 1 ship is still pretty good for you, TD.
Oh, there we go,
and then also Didi in the chat saying hello, boys. Good to see you, Didi. Hope you're having a great holiday season as we approach New Year's Eve. Steve, throwing it back to you, man. Or actually, sorry, Eric, throwing it back to you. You got a wide receiver wearing on from the Buffalo Bills. One of Steve's. I almost said Steve because it's Steve's favorite player in the world.
I actually went away from him because I was like, that's just too on brand. So take it away.
Yeah, it's bang on that you tossed to Steve because I want to talk about Keon Coleman. Look, this year for Bills receivers broadly has been kind of tricky, right? You know, I've dubbed them as Green Bay East, right? They've just got so many very good to pretty great guys that are just in this huge rotation, and it's really hard to identify on a week-to-week basis who's the one to target. But with Amari Cooper's contract, there's no guarantee that he will be back in Buffalo for another season. And as I try to piece together, you know, what to make of the 2025 outlook for this receiving core, I look at Keon Coleman, who, despite missing a good chunk of games, is readily among the snap leaders on this team. And when he was out there, he was getting targets. His targets per route run is at a very high rate. His fantasy points per target is number 7 in the league. So, you know, a guy that when he's getting the opportunity, he's making a lot of it. That's usually one of those leading indicator stats that, you know, in a limited role, they're doing a lot. Let's see what happens if they get a little bit of a larger role. So his snaps are there. I think his targets will follow next season. And if they do, he can be a very nice value for you.
I just want to say, you and I have been arguing about it all year, and I'm ready to wave the white flag on, like, Khalil Shakir kind of let me down. He kind of let me down. I had a lot of Khalil Shakir.
He was crushing it when everyone was out, right? This was the argument all year. Like, if he's on the field enough, he's great. And then everyone got healthy, and he's now no longer on the field. Also, I feel like I see some Khalil Shakir in your guy Jalen McMillan too. When you were talking about him, I was like, Seth definitely has a type.
Yeah. McMillan can play a little bit more true outside than I think. Than I think Khalil can. But Khalil had opportunities in week 16, dropped a couple, at least a pair of touchdowns. So that was disappointing. Hard catches, you know, not gimmies by any means. So that was pretty disappointing. But yeah, we're waiting for that alpha to emerge. I thought it was going to be the tight end this year, right? Steve, I was all over Dalton Kincaid, and it wasn't.
You were. What did I just see? Someone had 19 points in a game, and I think they said that's more than Kincaid scored all season. And that's just rough. That's not good. So, like, it's probably not true, but it's an indicator of how bad he was. Here's the thing with Keon Coleman, though. Josh Allen was in a bind, right? Like, we saw him. He was scrambling. He was kind of desperate to just do something. And he tossed the ball up to Keon Coleman, right? Like, at the end of the day, Keon Coleman's going to get targets that he has no business getting because he catches balls he has no business catching.
George Pickens balls, yeah.
Like, there's no reason to throw it other than you're like, I just think Keon Coleman has a better chance of catching this than anybody else on the field. And he catches touchdowns, right? And that's another thing Keon Coleman does is he's a very explosive, and I said this to people before the season, he was our punt returner at Florida State. He was the number 2 punt returner in the country. This man is good with the ball in his hands. He's explosive. Every time he touches the ball, it's an explosive play, it seems like. You know, Eric had the stats to back that up. But when I see quarterbacks like Josh Allen trust a rookie to go up and make a play like that over an Amari Cooper, over a Khalil Shakir, over a Dalton Kincaid, who have all been there, that only indicates that going forward, his role is going to grow and grow and grow. So I am very excited for what Keon Coleman has in store for the next season.
My biggest question for Coleman will be, like, can he take this big step in year 2 or will it be a year 3 thing? Because, like, even with George Pickens, we knew from day one when George Pickens stepped on the practice field, this guy was going to be a dog. And it just took a couple years for him to really, like, have the fantasy production, right? Like,
I still don't think he's great.
It did. It took a couple years for him to get a quarterback that wasn't Kenny Pickett as well.
True.
This is also something that happened. I don't think you have to worry about that quite as much with Josh Allen.
True. Good. Yeah. Very, very. And he didn't have Matt Canada, I guess, calling the play. So great points. But when we brought up, like, George Pickens, I don't want to take anyone back there. Yeah, let's
giving me the shakes.
Yeah, no, we're leaving that. That's a 2023 thing. That's why 2024, much better year, right? Much better year for me. No Matt Canada in my life. It's been great. We got Tyler coming in saying truth. Yeah,
that's what took Seth so long to propose. He's like, I'm not proposing under a Canada regime. Like, I won't do it.
Can't do that. It's not right. Damn it.
That's a good excuse. I might use that one.
He's
Thank
like,
you
that's
for
a
that.
happy occasion. I won't do it.
Katie's gonna love it.
I appreciate that. I'm gonna use that next Thanksgiving when I get asked. Steve, round us out here. We got one more sleeper. It's at the tight end position. There's one theme we do have in this group, guys. It's a lot of rookies from 2024 that didn't really pop yet, so they are sleepers in 2025, specifically at the tight end position. You're like in one of my own. We are, baby.
Yeah, I love Theo Johnson. Like, listen, those year one late breakout, year two breakout guys, that's where I live and die in fantasy football. It's why I make the playoffs every year of of the leagues that I'm in. It's because I'm willing to be like, listen, it may not have happened last year, but the pieces were there for it to come together. Theo Johnson looked every bit a tight end one when he was healthy and playing. He just got hurt. And the great thing about season-ending injuries is people forget about them, right? Like they'll forget about the player. It makes them fall off the radar entirely. And that is such a clutch thing for someone who's just like, when you're playing, it's a very what have you done for me lately kind of game. But you can't think of it that way. You need to remember what were the pieces going forward. And going forward, Theo Johnson was that guy. If they don't bring in significant tight end competition, this is their guy at tight end. And I think they're going to bring in a quarterback that is able to utilize that, right? Like Cam Ward's probably going to be a giant, barring another win, which like I understand no one wants to tank, right? And I respect the fuck out of Dable and the players for not tanking.
Yeah.
Franchise wise, you're probably a little pissed, right? Like you wind up this could very well lead to a Brian Flores kind of situation where the owner's like, hey, you may have had another year, but then you refuse to tank, and so now you're gone because you're kind of fucking up everything here. So, because listen, no one wants another fucking year of Drew Lock, right? Like this is rough. Like at this point,
hey,
like Justin
4
Fields
touchdown Drew Lock, 4 touchdown Drew Lock.
Justin Fields or Jameis Winston should be the quarterback for the New York Giants next year if they don't get a top 4 pick.
Yeah. Like the
little Kirko Cousins heading up to the Meadowlands.
Kirk Cousins needs to retire, right? Like he's gonna get cut. It's time for Kirk Cousins to retire. It's time for Aaron Rodgers to retire. I'm sick of these old dudes like getting these jobs because like of what they did 10 years ago. Like
let me just tell you, if Theo Johnson is on the other end of Cam Ward's passes, I'm in. Like,
yeah, right.
I mean, talk about one of the guys, 9.99 RAS, relative athletic score at the combine. We've talked about that on this show plenty of times. Theo Johnson's a weapon out there. He did have a couple games where he was second in the Giants in targets, right behind Malik Neighbors. So if he can get back healthy, Erica, I do like Theo. It's just like, how much of the Giants are we willing to invest in? Like, is it the up year or is it the down year we get next year? It's always a gamble when investing in New York players, whether that's the Giants or the Jets.
By the way, if either of you are rostering Gibbs in a championship, he just scored a touchdown, 30 yards.
I am not, but I need Jared Goff to stop throwing.
I did, but I already won both those leagues, but thank you, Gibbs.
I need Jared Goff to stop throwing. Yeah, to your point, right? Like the Giants have largely been synonymous with ineptitude on the offensive side this year, and all of a sudden you've got guys like Tyrone Tracy having a phenomenal rookie season, guys like Malik Neighbors who missed 3 games and likely would have broken Puka Nakua's reception record as a rookie from last year, right? So like, you know, there are definitely pockets. I think the thing to keep in mind is, you know, even on these bad teams, the receiving weapons are a little bit insulated, right? Because they're probably going to be trailing. There's going to be a little more volume.
True.
And Theo Johnson looked electric out there, right? Like there was a point where he was participating on like 95% of snaps in terms of running a route. You know, the injury is a back one, right? It's nothing that should really inhibit him heading into the upcoming season. And his athleticism is off the charts, right? So like, you know, we talked about it a little bit with Tennessee, these teams that are rebuilding, like, once you find a guy to where you're comfortable rolling forward with him and you don't have to spend any more draft or other capital to try to address that problem, you kind of check the box and move on and go address one of the other 15 fires you have to put out, right? So Theo Johnson, I think he put up enough good tape this year to at least have the inside track heading in the next year. And I mean, he's athletic enough to where a often trailing Giants team presumably should need to throw, and he'll be in the mix, no doubt.
All right, guys, let's go ahead. Let's turn the page now and let's do our all in the scope team. These are our best calls from our waivers a week early segment. Let's hit it and in the scope.
I have the Taurus in my sights.
Requesting permission to engage.
In the scope.
So I love the end of the season because we really get to like take a 50-foot level now, right? Like we can zoom out a little bit, we can catch our breath, and we can say, hey, where were we right? Where were we wrong? And specifically in the scope is a segment we've been doing on this show since the very beginning of it, always trying to kind of get a week early because I feel like, hey, we don't need to be the 900th show out there doing waiver wire targets, right? Like we want to be a little bit different. So that's what we do on this program. And I wanted to actually look at 2023s as well. I pulled our all in the scope team from last year and just check out some of these names. We had Puka Nacua, Trey McBride, Rashid Rice, Devin Singletary, Tyjae Spears, Kyler Murray. It felt like this season, 2024, we hit on someone for a week. Like we should have been betting these guys for anytime touchdowns or betting them for over receiving yards because they would be the mainstream option the next week. It felt like a lot of times, but there wasn't as much staying power this year, right? I felt like on the waiver wire as a whole, I don't know if you guys felt like this, but after week 5 or 6, there wasn't a whole lot. Like you would pick up a guy, you would stream him for a week or two, and outside Drake Maye and like Jonnu Smith, who we'll talk about, like it wasn't a whole lot of goodness. Eric, did you feel that way too? Or do you think maybe we just kind of missed our shot earlier this year on guys like Bucky Irving, who in my opinion was the pickup of the year?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky, right? The format is one where we're not really talking about the mainstream targets, right? So, Bucky Irving has a breakout game. He's going to be one of the most popular pickups, and therefore he's kind of off of our radar, right?
We would have had to get him pre-week 1, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, we're largely looking at, guys that are a little bit more speculative in nature. And by doing that, I think it underscores the importance of this exercise, right? Like whether it's a bye week, whether it is an unforeseen injury, you're going to need to fill holes in your roster every single week, right? So being able to go out and get a guy for free that 2 weeks later is going to be able to be a start for you, right? Or get you 7, 8 flex-worthy range points, right? Like that is absolutely one of the things that's the difference between making the playoffs or not. So, I mean, you obviously love it when, you take a speculative dart in week 1 and he becomes Puka Nacua. That's fantastic, but it's also not all that frequent of an outcome. The more likely thing is finding a guy that, can fill in for a few weeks while you get your core back together. And I think that's what we've seen in this year's crop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, dude, like we were on a freaking heater last year. It's insane. We pulled out some guys who you just love to have, but we'll get into this year's all in the scope team. Everyone contributed to it. So happy to break it down. Starting at the quarterback position, a guy we've already talked about tonight, Drake Maye for the Patriots. I called him out in week 10. Drake Maye, we know he's a weapon. And it's like no fantasy manager still even cared. Like he was still just around like 35% roster at the end of the year. Since taking that starting job in week 6, we talked about it, quarterback 12 overall, quarterback 14 in points per game. Rushing upside has made him a lethal low-end quarterback option that did help people win championships. At the running back position, we had Jerome Ford, who Eric called out in week 15. Hard year for running back on the waivers. If you didn't get someone early, it was really tough. You're kind of just plugging and playing as you could go along because not a ton of injuries to some of the top guys either until way at the end of the season. But Eric, you were in your bag on this one. Like you called out Jerome Ford before his 18.4 fantasy point performance in week 15. That was the same week Nick Chubb ended up getting hurt as well. Then he goes up and finishes with 24.1 fantasy points in week 16, back-to-back RB1 performances. And then he injures his ankle in week 17. So kind of a bittersweet run for Jerome Ford, but you definitely saw something in this guy.
Yeah, with a lot of our in the scope running back targets from earlier, looking to get the guy before he's the guy is a strategy of mine. And it's why I've got a bunch of Jerome Ford in Dynasty because Nick Chubb isn't going to be Nick Chubb forever. And if you can get his backup a year or two early, throw him on your taxi squad, you're in a good spot. And it's really the same thought here, right? With Nick Chubb returning from that catastrophic knee injury, he was on the short list of, guys most likely to, either re-aggravate that injury or just generally be effective. So it was more a response to I think Jerome Ford was cut a little too hastily, and that's where a lot of these in the scope targets come from, right? Go through and look who gets cut. Look who's the most dropped players in your respective leagues. A lot of times we're being a little too reactionary, and those guys are worth a stash, and that's specifically how we landed on Ford.
Yeah, if you can get ahead, man, it's very, very powerful. At the wide receiver position, Adam Thielen was our wide receiver 1 for our in the scope team. I mean, time does not exist for Adam Thielen. Like, this guy's fucking Thanos, Steve. I mean, I felt like I jumped the gun a little bit. Like, if you picked up Adam Thielen when I told you to all the way back in week 8, you definitely had to stash him on your IR for a couple weeks, but you were rewarded. Wide receiver 15 down stretch, averaged 17.1 fantasy points. 2 wide receiver 1 finishes, including a 28 fantasy point performance in championship weeks, 2 wide receiver 2 finishes, 1 wide receiver 4 finish in that span. Thielen was awesome down the stretch. He was a league winner, Steve.
Yeah, at this point, Adam Thielen has like 5 good weeks in him, right? So like you're hoping when you like take Adam Thielen, you just want them to sit him on the bench for 10 weeks and then just ride from there, right? Like that's the goal. And yeah, he's been amazing. I don't foresee it lasting. Again, I think they'll bring in new wide receivers in Carolina. I think Adam Thielen's on his last legs. But every now and then, I think sometimes in redraft, we take a dynasty approach to it, right? Like sometimes people get hung up on age, and it's like, hey, listen, who the fuck else was going to catch the ball in Carolina?
Deontay Johnson.
Well, he ain't catching anything.
He did
now,
for a minute.
He ain't catching anything but now, but dirty stares in that Ravens locker room before getting cut there.
The Texans wide receiver 2 for a Super Bowl run this year. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I'm just glad the Steelers didn't bring him back. That's all I'll say. But like even the Steelers, they could have had Adam Thielen at the trade deadline. A lot of teams could have, and he would add some juice to the Lurs offense and a couple of these teams out there, still in the mix, still in the hunt. So yeah, I really liked Adam Thielen. He was a great stash. And Steve, someone you called out in week 1 who maybe didn't set the league on fire, but had a really nice second year rebound for a first round pick coming out of TCU. That's your guy, Quentin Johnston, that you locked on to, as we said, heading into week 1. Wide receiver 45 in points per game, wide receiver 47 overall on the season, 2 wide receiver 1 finishes, 1 wide receiver 2 finish, and 3 wide receiver 3 finishes. 9+ PPR points, though, in 8 of 14 games played this season. Steve, it wasn't like Quentin Johnston wasn't a revolutionary piece, I think, of any fantasy football team, but he was a guy you could have held on to all year and was good when you needed him in spot starts and bye weeks.
Yeah, and that's what the whole in the scope is, right? Like, again, like, listen, we are not giving you, like, there's no Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, guys. Justin
Sometimes there are. 2024 wasn't a year.
Sometimes there are, but for the most part, there's not, especially in the scope. Like, it's hard to be like, hey, listen, these are the guys you're going to get for free with $0 bids.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we have to remember. Like, that's why, like, none of us said Tyrone Tracy because he was the obvious next man up. Quentin Johnston was a victim of narrative coming into the season, and that's what I thought. I'm like, hey, listen, they spent on this guy. I think he has more talent than, people realize. Like, everyone's like, he can't catch. I'm like, well, he's an NFL wide receiver, so I'm sure, given the opportunity, he'll catch some of them. And he has, and he's a touchdown kind of guy. Would he be on my target list next year? Probably not. But this year he worked out, and he was a good spot start for you if you needed it. You knew you could get, you kind of knew what you were getting out of him with the upside of like 20 points, which was nice.
Yeah. At the tight end position, probably maybe our best call of the season, Steve, in week 8, Jonnu Smith, tight end for the Miami Dolphins. Who would have thought? Boston's boy did, that's for sure. Tight end 4 overall this season. He has been the tight end 1. Yes, the tight end 1 since Steve called him out in week 8. Congratulations. Insane stat line with career highs in targets, receptions, yards, 99 targets, 79 receptions, 828 yards. Also had 7 touchdowns, double-digit PPR points in 7 straight games to end the season. Eric, what are your thoughts on this run from Jonnu Smith? I mean, this was sensational and great call by Steve.
Yeah, absolutely electric, right? There were points in this stretch where I'm trying to find which week it was, but he was like skunked all the way through a game, and then had like a 5-catch overtime, including a touchdown, right? So just like so many ways to get it done for a Miami offense that has always been kind of lackluster at the tight end position. Jonnu Smith is a little long in the tooth, but all things considered, but was able to come in and give them some juice at the position and actually look pretty electric out there, right? Drew a handsome target rate, 29% of his routes resulted in a target.
Jeez.
And was if nothing else the steady hand in this offense, right? He wasn't spiky. When you needed him on to get a big first down, when you need him in the red zone, he was there. And now all of a sudden tight end 4 on the season and the tight end 1 since Steve called him out. So Miami's been trying to answer this question for a while, and it looks like they've done just that with Jonnu.
Steve, who would have thought in 2024, a year when Tyreek Hill was a first-round pick and a year when Jalen Waddle was still going in that 3rd, 4th round, who would have thought it would have been Jonnu Smith, who was the most valuable pass-catching option on the Dolphins? I don't even think you did at that time could envision the run he would go on.
No, not like this. Like, obviously not. Like, I'd be lying if I said I was like, yeah, I thought he'd outperform Tyreek and Waddle and Achane and all that shit. But what I did think is that Jonnu Smith for a long time has shown that he is an elite athlete in the league, right? Not just at the tight end position, just in general.
Yeah.
This man is a freak athlete. And what actually happened in week 7 when I kind of called this, or week 8 when I called this out, was he took a tight end screen, weaved through the defense, right, and scored. And it was very much in that vein of what Mike McDaniel loves to see out of his players.
Yeah.
Again, sometimes in fantasy football, like, you have to kind of just watch the game. Like, that's another thing you need to do. If you want to, like, kind of hit these targets, you need to watch the games, right? Don't just look at the box score, because that's not going to tell you everything. When you see someone do that and you see what they're able to do, that's really where you start to, like, separate these in the scope targets and find those diamonds in the rough. I always thought, listen, I did not think he should have pushed Kyle Pitts out of the tight end 1 position last year, but I figured there was a reason. And I remembered him in Tennessee being pretty elite. And I remember him from his time in New England, me being like, why is this man not on the field instead of Hunter Henry? Like, that's driving me kind of crazy. Yeah. So it's nice to see Jonnu Smith get the recognition he deserves, the production he deserves, because he's tough, he's athletic. I like the guy. I would target him next year early as a tight end.
Good on you, Jonnu. Good on you. At the flex position, rounding out are all in the scope team. Wan'Dale Robinson, wide receiver for the New York Giants. I called him out heading into week 2, right after week 1. It was a lit start for Wan'Dale, man. The kid out of Kentucky, wide receiver 23 through the first 6 weeks. Finishes wide receiver 40 on the season. So a high-end wide receiver 4, kind of fell off through the season, but he did finish with 13.2 fantasy points and 18.1 fantasy points in week 16 and 17. I don't know how many people really were starting him at that point, but Eric, Wan'Dale had his run, but really, like, when the Giants offense as a whole fell off, you just couldn't trust him.
Yeah, that was really it, right? There was a point where he was among the league leaders in targets and targets per route run in air yard share, right? And a lot of that had to do with the rapport that he had built with Daniel Jones, right? Daniel Jones was going there when Malik Neighbors was getting double covered, when he needed a first down. And, that led to that insane volume floor. Yeah. And then Daniel Jones, goes out with injury, loses his job, and all of a sudden Wan'Dale Robinson is just kind of like anyone else in the rest of that receiving core. He doesn't have the benefit of that good rapport with Drew Lock or Tommy Cutlets or whoever else they trotted out there. And now all of a sudden, the floor falls out, right? So, he's an interesting player. I mean, he's shown that if he can get into that good rhythm with a signal caller, he can bink his way onto the radar. But that's a very open question as the Giants presumably turn over the quarterback position heading into 2025.
Yeah, he was someone I hit a couple anytime TDs on early in the season. So, Wan'Dale, I appreciate you. You were a moneymaker. You helped me in fantasy early in the year as well. So, thank you for that, man. And guys, thanks for all your help on In the Scope this year. It was a great segment overall. Let's go ahead, though. We're going to round out the show with a little New Year's fantasy resolutions and weekly advice.
Weekly.
All right, we're giving you our early 2025 fantasy resolutions for the new year. Where did we go wrong in 2024? Where can we continue to up our game? We're going to tell you that here. And Eric, I'm going to start with you, man. What is your fantasy New Year's resolution?
Ooh, my resolution is kind of broad in nature, but we get to this time of the year, you're celebrating a championship, or you are bemoaning a loss on live YouTube channels, and you start thinking about what you could have done differently, things that you want to change about your league or about your format. You know, we get reflective around this time of year, and then 9 months goes by, summertime vibes have came and went, and you forget all of it. So right now, take a note, open your notes app, create a new bookmark folder on Twitter or whatever you want to do, and start actually logging these things that you want to change, and then go do it, right? Make sure you don't forget them. If you lost your league of record because they have a pointless 300-yard passing bonus, and that put your opponent over the top while you were streaming live, make it a point to go talk to your commissioner that you want to post a league vote that, you know, bonuses should go away, right? Whatever it might be, like, just write these things down, set a reminder in your phone, whatever it might, you know, however you need to remember it. You know, that is absolutely the best advice that I can get, because there's little wrinkles that cost us or that made the league imbalanced, or you know, strategies that you want to remember for next year, and it'll just turn to dust by the time September comes around.
Yeah, and I think kind of like on that note, that I'll kind of just piggyback is like, you got to be really honest with yourself, like what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy when it comes to fantasy football, or it won't be that much fun. Like, for instance, I have played in probably about like 7 or 8 leagues that are redraft every single season for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at this point that I've been playing in that many, and at least, you know, 2 or 3 for the last, you know, 15 years of my life, 20 years of my life. And like, I feel like I'm at a point now where I don't need to do 7 or 8, you know, redrafts. I think I could scale down that a little bit, but I didn't do a guillotine this year. And I was like, I would love to do a guillotine, or like, hey, I want to do some more Devy leagues. I want to do a campus to Canton league. I want to do a strictly college fantasy football league. I want to do more squad blitz leagues. You know what I mean? Like, there's different things that you can do. So I think kind of finding those different niches, finding people who enjoy those types of niches, and the right people you want to play in leagues with as well will do you wonders. So just kind of wanted to piggyback on that, because I think that is really important, Eric, is just like, in general, let's make sure that we're taking notes of good things in fantasy, bad things in fantasy. We got little Carlos here in the chat saying, is the championship round 1 or 2 weeks for fantasy football? Traditionally, most leagues it is 1-1, but I've played with in the past where it's a smaller league. Sometimes we'll do 2. Steve, do you like 2 or 1 round for a fantasy championship?
I don't hate the idea of 2. If you if you like shrunk the playoff pool and just did 2 rounds, like the top 4 made it, and you did 2 rounds each, I'm not opposed to that, but it's usually 1, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm one of those people who now I'm turning around like, hey, should we end things in week 16 now? Because week 17 this year felt like a lot with like the old week 17 before there was all this fuckery going on, you know, and extending everything. Like, it just felt like a really, like, dude, CeeDee Lamb out, Chuba Hubbard out. Like, it was tough. It was tough.
The problem
man.
is that if you do that, you run into buys.
Yeah.
So, and that means it's guaranteed that people are out. So
yeah, if there were no week 14 buys, I would strongly consider going back to 16. But call me weak, call me soft. I don't know. It's just something I'm thinking of. I don't know.
I mean, I'll call you those things, but it's not because of your take.
These are realities of the game, right?
Yeah.
Like we were talking about with short thing sleepers, right? Like, at every single week this year, you've had to overcome some adversity, fill some hole in your roster, right? Chuba Hubbard was my workhorse back on the team that just lost. I would have loved to have him this week, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, that can happen in week 8 or in week 16 or in week 17.
Yeah.
To little Carlos's question, going to a 2-week fantasy championship is a good way to kind of normalize you know, some of that variance, right? You know, you're able to get a larger sample size, Zach Ertz going on a miracle run in overtime.
Oh, that was awesome. That was awesome.
Might not have the as heavy a weight as
Yeah.
second week of scoring out there. So these are things where variance is part of the game. There's no way to completely eliminate it altogether, but you can do things to kind of dilute it a bit.
Yeah. Steve, I want to go to your fantasy resolution for 2025. What is it, my friend?
Yeah, and that going forward, I am drafting running backs on good teams and wide receivers on bad teams. This year, I lost my fantasy championship in the league that matters most to me because Alvin Kamara got dinged up and sat for the rest of the year because A, the opportunity wasn't there. B, like there was no point in getting him hurt, right? But
yeah.
Down the stretch, bad teams are just going to look worse and worse and worse and worse, right? Like Kamara looked really good to start the year. But once the Saints got bad, holy shit, did they get bad. And it doesn't get better, right? Like sometimes you'll get a Giants kind of game where everyone suddenly starts scoring all over the place except for Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah.
That's rare, right? Bad teams are going to play bad. Good teams are going to play well down the stretch. And that's what I'm going to bank on. So when the bad teams are playing poorly, they're going to have to throw the ball more. The good teams are going to lean on their running backs and just get you to the end zone. I want to stick with that. Josh Jacobs, league winner. Alvin Kamara, league loser. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Going back to your point, though, of the championship, right? If you wanted to mitigate all risk of injuries being a factor, you'd play the championship in week 1. I lost Rashee Rice in like week 5, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it is what it is. Unfortunate, but reality, right? Yes. If you have a guy, maybe something to think about. If you have a guy with lingering injuries like CeeDee Lamb had, and you see the season slipping away from the Cowboys like it was,
get out. Yeah.
Get out. Get out. I should have gotten out of Kamara. I saw the writing on the wall. Didn't want to believe it because he was my guy, right? He got me here. I was like riding Alvin Kamara. I was loyal.
Yeah.
Listen, be loyal in your relationships and fantasy football. Be that cheating bastard. Get rid of them. Cut them to the curb. See you later.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the reality because otherwise that's how you get herpes. So like fantasy wise. So you can't be doing that, right? You gotta cut it and run. So just be careful. I guess that would be another resolution is to not be quite as loyal to the guy who got me there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think like the wide receiver on bad teams, like we talked about Adam Thielen earlier in the episode, he was a league winner down the stretch for a pretty cruddy Carolina Panthers team. We've seen when Jacoby Myers has been healthy, he's been really good for the Raiders. Brock Bowers for the Raiders has been the tight end one. Like I definitely agree. Like if you get wide receivers on bad teams, as long as the quarterback play isn't like absolute dog piss.
Even if it is though, think of it this way, right? Like Aiden O'Connell is trash. Aiden O'Connell, I say this with full confidence, I could play quarterback as well as at that level. Like, I'm not even kidding.
No, like, I actually think Aiden O'Connell is not bad.
He's pretty booty.
Compared to like Desmond Ritters and the Kenny Pickett's of the world. I think Aiden O'Connell is like a top 40 quarterback in this league. I like O'Connell.
Well, yeah, in a league full of Kenny Pickett's and Desmond Ritters, sure, he's a top 40 quarterback.
I've never seen the NFL look more attainable for normal people at the quarterback position than this season, where I was just watching these guys like Kenny Pickett, whatever the Christ was going on with that throw.
Oh, jeez.
That ended up with him like ass over tea kettle. Like
you want to know the hurtful thing? I had an anytime interception on him. I just need an interception. So I just need him to stay in the freaking game, and he probably would have thrown an interception. So screw Kenny Pickett.
I've never seen someone actually like front flip trying to throw a ball, not like a child, not a backyard football game, flag football game, Pop Warner, Pee Wee football. I've never seen it. It was crazy. I'm like, I could do that. I could do that.
Tyler in the chat, Steve, you're not better than AOC. I agree.
I'll go play. Give me the pads. We're going out there,
brother. You want to make it. You want to make it in the FCS, man. I can promise you that much. I'll round us out though with my advice for the new year. Something I need to stop doing is stop drafting early to mid round tight ends. Eric, you've really been a great co-host over the years because you've really preached like, let's stop with the onesie positions because you can find gold later in the season, potentially, whether that's, riding Drake May to your fantasy football championships like I did, following a guy like Steve's recommendation earlier in the season where you're picking up someone like Jonnu Smith or Zach Ertz, who we haven't really given him flowers, but he was a great start down the stretch for a large majority of the season. It's like, I need to stop drafting early to mid-round tight ends. this year I didn't have any Laporta. Like I dodged the Laporta bullets, but I had a boatload of Kelsey. I had a ton of Kincaid, and it just didn't make a difference, man. Like the leagues I did the best on is when I grabbed like Brock Bowers in the 8th or 9th round, 10th round, like those were when I just didn't have a tight end and I was just going from, the Taysom Hills to the Pat Fryermuth to who can I roll Tucker Kraft. Had a ton of Tucker Kraft in best ball this year. Like I just need to stop overpaying for these. Like, I mean, next year with Brock Bowers, like I'm probably not going to be able to pay up for him. Like he's probably going to be an early 3rd round pick, late 2nd round. I don't like, give me Tyler Warren in the 10th, give me Colson Loveland in the 12th. Like I'll take all these young guys and like, or just like, I don't know. I'm just jaded on these early to mid round tight ends, Eric. It feels like every year you're crossing your fingers and you're throwing a dart, and it feels like too much draft capital to give up.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like it's not a death sentence by any means, right? Trey McBride, George Kittle, right? Like these are guys that were kind of going in that middle round.
It's like 50-50
Mark Andrews
though.
after week 4 or whatever it was, right? Like these are guys that did fine for you, right? But like they really have to hit near the top of their range of outcomes in order to justify that capital, right? So it's much more of kind of a sample size or a midpoint argument. You can get a top 10 tight end, a top 12 tight end with one of your last couple of picks, right? So use that early to mid round capital to go get a legitimate game changer, and then to speculate in the tight end market, right? Get a couple of guys that are, second, maybe even last round clicks, and hope that one of them pops off, right? You can dive into the analysis and the evaluation and trust that enough to where maybe you can get a sleeper a little bit later. But ultimately, like the position itself is kind of broken for fantasy purposes. So like you're either going to need to spend early capital and hope that a guy performs like a wide receiver, or just lean into the fact that, all but 2 or 3 of your league mates are going to get like 6 to 8 points out of their tight end position and go try to get your edge elsewhere.
I'm saying this now. Bookmark this moment. Brock Bowers is not worth whatever round pick he's going to be next year, because he's probably going to be a back end first, early second, like early Kelsey was. He's not worth it. Frankly, I think fantasy football needs to go away from the tight end position altogether and make that an extra flex spot. Just flex it.
I do love the tight end position still, but I think I'll just have to save my
bullet. You're also the guy who is like, I won't watch college football anymore if,
I love the Big Ten. Hop off, man. I love the Big Ten.
Oh, that's what it was. The super con. It's like, if it's one big conference, I won't watch anymore. As if that makes a fucking difference.
I love conferences. I love conferences. Tyler in the chat saying Seth loved Kenny Pickett when he came in. Regrets. Yeah, that's some that's some regrets right there, boys. Let me tell you that right now. ACC player. That's why. ACC, not a Big Ten boy. Not a Big Ten boy. We got Richard in the chat saying, just won my championship. Thank you, Gibbs, for that TD. I needed that. Hey, congrats, Richard. Glad to hear it, man. Congrats. Talk your greasy shit, man. Go talk some shit to your league. Make sure you thank them all for a great season as well. And thank you, Richard and Tyler, everyone who's been riding with us in the chat tonight. We greatly appreciate it. If you enjoy this type of content, please like this video and subscribe if you're new. We're here every Tuesday, usually 9:35 p.m. Eastern time. We also have a boatload of NASCAR betting content. Also, if you're into college football betting content, entertainment betting, or PGA betting content and fantasy content, we got it all here on the channel. So make sure you guys are checking out. For Steve Lawson, Eric Romoff, our guy behind the scenes, Kyle Scott, I am Seth Wilcock. Have a great start to 2025, and we'll see you next time here on the IBT podcast. Until then, y'all know what to do. Keep it in between. Thank you.